While my grandfather lay in the ICU, fighting for his life, my own parents stole $990,000 from the account I had built to save him. Please stay with me as I walk you through this painful journey, and if my story speaks to you, I'd truly appreciate your support. Hit subscribe, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. My name is Nicole. I'm in my mid-20s, a nurse who has spent every ounce of energy trying to build a decent life. More than anyone else, I owe who I am to my grandfather, Henry. He wasn't just a grandparent. He was my safe place, my biggest cheerleader, and in so many ways, the father figure I never really got from my actual dad. When I was little, he walked me to school, packed my lunches, and sat through every piano recital even when I messed up. He was the one person I could trust blindly. When Henry's heart condition grew worse, I promised myself that money would never be the reason I lost him. I picked up extra shifts, worked through nights, skipped vacations, and saved every dollar I could. Over the years, I built an account close to $1 million, dedicated only to his care. It wasn't about me. It was about giving him a chance to live longer, to maybe see me get married one day, to sit in a rocking chair and tell stories to his great-grandkid. So when the day finally came that he was rushed to the ICU, I wasn't afraid of the financial burden. I thought, I'm ready. I can do this for him. The doctors were clear. There were options, but they were costly. Still, I had peace in my heart knowing I had prepared for this exact moment. But that peace didn't last. When I tried to access the account, the balance was empty. At first, I thought it was some kind of glitch. Maybe the bank made a mistake. Maybe fraudsters had gotten in. My hands shook as I scrolled through the transactions, and that's when my stomach dropped. The withdrawals weren't random. They weren't from strangers. They were from my parents, David and Linda. I couldn't breathe. My mind kept saying, no, not them. My parents had taken everything. All the money I'd worked for. The money meant to save the man who raised me when they couldn't. I remember standing in the hospital hallway, the machines beeping in the background, staring at my phone's screen until the numbers blurred. Betrayal doesn't just sting. It guts you from the inside out. I wanted to scream, cry, smash something, but all I could do was sit there and feel my heart split in two. Henry was fighting for his life a few rooms away, and I had the means to help him, except my own parents had drained it all. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about trust, family, and a kind of betrayal I never thought I'd live through. I remember the day like it's burned into my memory forever. After leaving the ICU, I went straight to the bank, hoping there had been some mistake. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I explained to the teller that my account showed almost $1 million missing. She gave me a polite but tight smile and said she'd pull up the records. I held my breath, silently praying that this was fraud and could be reversed, that someone had hacked the account and not what my gut was already whispering. When she returned with the paperwork, I felt the ground slide out from under me. The withdrawals weren't random. Every transfer, every signature, every move, it was all connected to my parents' names. David, Linda, my own blood. My body went cold. I stared at the papers until the numbers blurred, until my eyes stung with tears I didn't even realize were falling. I walked out of that bank like a ghost. Anger, grief, and disbelief swirled inside me all at once. My grandfather was hooked up to machines, clinging to life, and the very people who should have cared most had gutted me. By the time I reached my car, I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. But I knew what I had to do. I had to face them. When I pulled into their driveway, I was trembling, not from fear but from rage. They came to the door like nothing had happened. My father leaned against the frame, calm, almost bored, while my mother smiled too sweetly, like she'd been expecting. Why? I demanded, my voice cracking. Why would you take the money? That was for Grandpa. That was his only chance. My father's face didn't change. He shrugged like it was no big deal. It's family money, Nicole. You act like you built it all alone. We raised you, we sacrificed for you. So don't come here acting like you don't owe us. I felt like I'd been slapped. My mother stepped forward, her voice dripping with fake concern. Sweetheart, you'll thank us one day. You don't need to waste that much on an old man who's already lived his life. We invested it into something better, into our future, into your future too. Their words cut deeper than knives. There was no remorse, no guilt, no sense of the life they had just jeopardized, just entitlement and arrogance. I wanted to scream that Henry wasn't just an old man. He was my everything. He was the reason I worked double shifts, the reason I had no social life, the reason I was even standing there in front of them. But instead of understanding, they rolled their eyes. My father muttered that I was being dramatic. My mother smirked like she'd won some twisted game. In that moment, the betrayal sank in fully. They hadn't just stolen money. They had stolen hope. They had stolen time with Henry I would never get back. And standing in that doorway, looking at the two people who brought me into this world, I realized I no longer had parents. I only had enemies. The days that followed felt like a blur, a never-ending cycle of sterile hallways, the beeping of machines, and the smell of disinfectant that clung to my clothes. I spent every waking hour at the ICU, sitting by my grandfather's side, clutching his hand, whispering prayers that somehow things would turn around. But reality was merciless. Without the money, the doctors kept reminding me that certain treatments, the ones that could have given him a fighting chance, weren't possible. I begged, I pleaded, I promised I would find a way, but hospitals don't run on promises. They wanted proof of payment, and all I had left was an empty account and a heart full of despair. Every day I fought. I sat in offices, trying to negotiate, trying to convince someone to give him more time, more care. I showed them pay stubs, offered to sign repayment agreements, anything, but the numbers were just too big. I'd spent years preparing, and in one betrayal, it had all been ripped away. Meanwhile, Henry's body grew weaker. His once strong hands, the ones that taught me to tie my shoes and held me steady on my bike, now trembled under my touch. One evening, after another frustrating meeting with the billing department, I returned to his room to find him awake, his eyes, tired but still sharp, watching me. I sat beside him, tears already burning in my eyes. He reached out, squeezing my fingers with what little strength he had left. "Don't cry, Nicky," he whispered, his voice raspy. "You've done enough. More than enough." I shook my head, choking back sobs. "I should have protected you. I had the money. I worked so hard, and my voice broke. They took it from you." He gave me a faint smile, though his eyes carried a sadness I'll never forget. "Don't let them take from you again." Those were his words, simple, but they sank deep into my soul. Moments later, the monitors around us began to sound alarm. Nurses rushed in, moving quickly, calling codes I barely understood, but I couldn't let go of his hand. I held it tight, begging him not to leave me, begging fate to give me one more day. But despite their efforts, the fight was over. My grandfather, the man who had been my world, slipped away while I clung to him, my tears falling on his still hand. The pain that tore through me was indescribable. It felt like my chest was caving in, like the earth itself had split beneath me. I cried until my voice was gone, cried until there was nothing left but emptiness. But underneath that crushing grief, something else began to grow. It was quiet at first, like a spark, but it burned hotter with every passing second. They had stolen his chance at life, stolen my last moments of peace with him. And as I sat there by his bedside, broken but alive, I made a silent vow. This betrayal would not be buried with him. One day, they would pay for what they had done. Grief has a way of sitting heavy on your chest, like a weight you can't push off no matter how hard you try. After Henry's funeral, I found myself moving through life on autopilot, working shifts, pretending to eat, pretending to sleep. But the anger kept building. I couldn't stop thinking about how my parents had stolen not just money, but time. I needed to know what they had done with it all, the nearly $1 million I had bled myself dry saving. It didn't take long to find out. Social media made it too easy. Pictures of my mother draped in designer clothes, her wrists glittering with jewelry, her smile brighter than I'd seen in years. My father standing in front of a brand new luxury SUV, one arm thrown casually over the hood as if he'd earned it. Posts about vacations, sunny beaches, champagne toasts, fine dining. Each photo felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. While I was crying myself to sleep, clutching Henry's old sweater just to feel close to him, they were out celebrating, living their best life with blood money. I drove past their new house one night just to see it for myself. It was massive, far bigger than the modest home I'd grown up in. Lights blazed through the windows, laughter spilling out when they opened the door to let guests inside. Music thumped faintly from the backyard. They were hosting a party. A party, weeks after the man who raised me was put in the ground, because they had stolen his only chance. My fists gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. The next day, I showed up at their doorstep. My heart was pounding, but I was ready. When my mother answered, she looked surprised for only a second before smirking. "Nicole," she said smoothly, like we were long-lost friends. "You finally decided to visit." I pushed past her, my voice trembling with rage. "How could you? How could you buy all this while Grandpa was dying? That money was for him. It was his chance, and you stole it." My father came down the stairs, his expression flat, bored even. He leaned on the railing and shook his head. "You're being dramatic. We raised you, Nicole. We gave you food, shelter, everything. Don't act like you don't owe us. That money was just sitting there, and we needed it more than some doctor's fantasy." I stared at him, my mouth hanging open in disbelief. My mother crossed her arms, her smirk widening. "It's just money," she said coolly. "You'll move on. People die every day. You'll thank us later for investing in something worthwhile instead of wasting it on a lost cause." Her words knocked the air out of me. I wanted to scream, to break something, to make them feel the pain I felt every second of every day. But all I could do was stand there, trembling with fury. Their laughter, their arrogance, their smugness. It lit a fire inside me. At that moment, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to beg them anymore. I wasn't going to cry in front of them. I was going to make sure they regretted every second of their greedy celebration. The rage I carried with me after that last confrontation didn't fade. It sharpened. Every time I replayed their smug words in my head, every time I saw their photos of vacations and designer clothes, it fueled me. But instead of screaming at them again, I decided to do something far more dangerous. I was going to take everything back. Not just the money, but their pride, their freedom, their reputation. I started small, quietly gathering every scrap of evidence I could find. I pulled copies of the bank statements showing the withdrawals. I requested transaction histories, highlighting every wire transfer with their names attached. I tracked the sudden deeds filed under their names, the new house, the flashy cars registered to them. Each piece of paper felt like a weapon, one that I tucked carefully into a growing folder. But I knew I couldn't do this alone. One morning, on my day off, I walked into a lawyer's office with shaking hands and a folder clutched to my chest. I explained everything, from the account I'd built, to my grandfather's death, to the money my parents had drained. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Parker, listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and tapped the folder. "Nicole," she said slowly, "this isn't just immoral. This is criminal. You have enough here to pursue charges of theft and fraud. Depending on how they move the money, there may even be federal implications." Her words gave me a rush of hope I hadn't felt in months. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt like maybe I wasn't powerless. But Ms. Parker warned me to move carefully. If I came at them recklessly, they'd cover their tracks or hide assets. She suggested we build quietly, document everything, and then strike when they least expected it. So that's what I did. On the outside, I forced myself to play the grieving daughter trying to patch things up. I visited my parents occasionally, pretending to accept their excuses, even offering stiff smiles as if I was trying to move on. My mother would pat my hand and say she was glad I was finally healing. My father would nod smugly, convinced I'd realized he was right. But inside, I was ice cold. Every visit, I noticed details, the luxury items they bragged about, the expensive wine on the counter, the new credit cards they flashed at restaurants. I went home after each meeting and documented it all. Dates, receipts, witnesses, everything that could be traced back. I didn't scream at them anymore. I didn't let them see me break. Instead, I smiled through clenched teeth, all the while building the case that would destroy them. They thought they had won, that I was weak and beaten. But they had no idea I was quietly pulling the strings, setting the stage for their downfall. And when the time came, they wouldn't even see it coming. It started with one anonymous phone call. I dialed the IRS hotline late at night, my voice low and steady as I explained the sudden spike in my parents' wealth and their lavish spending. I gave details, new house, luxury vehicles, expensive vacations, without ever saying my name. By the time I hung up, my hands were trembling, but my heart felt lighter. I had set the first stone rolling downhill, and there was no stopping it now. Weeks later, I began to notice the shift. Subtle at first, letters arriving in the mail with government seals, my father's furrowed brow as he opened them, my mother snapping at him over dinner. I visited one evening, playing the dutiful daughter who was trying to reconnect, and I caught the tension in the air immediately. Their laughter was gone, replaced by hushed arguments that leaked through the kitchen wall. At dinner, my father pushed food around his plate, muttering under his breath. My mother hissed, "You told me you handled everything. Now we have tax people sniffing around, asking questions. What are we supposed to tell them?" I kept my face calm, sipping water, nodding at their complaints as though I knew nothing. Inside, I was savoring every word. When my mother turned to me, her lips tight, and said, "The government is always targeting successful people," I forced a sympathetic smile. "That sounds stressful. I hope it works out for you." My father gave me a hard stare, as if trying to read my mind, but I didn't flinch. That same week, I decided to push further. My father had always worked in finance, a position of trust where money flowed through his hands daily. I typed out an anonymous email to his employer, attaching copies of suspicious transactions tied to him, hinting at possible financial misconduct. It didn't take long for the fallout to reach him. One afternoon, as I left my shift at the hospital, I saw him in the parking lot pacing by his car, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was sharp, panicked, unlike the calm arrogance he usually carried. "It's just a misunderstanding," he barked into the phone. "I'll clear it up." He didn't see me slip by, but I caught the sweat on his forehead, the way his hand shook as he ran it through his hair. The cracks widened with each passing week. Credit card declines at restaurants, arguments about missing paperwork, my mother accusing my father of being careless. Their once steady confidence had turned into snapping, shouting, and slammed doors. They were unraveling, and I was there to watch every strand of their foundation come loose. Every time they looked at me, I kept my mask on. I smiled politely, offered condolences, acted as though I was just the grieving daughter trying to mend ties. But when I walked out of their house and sat in my car, I let the smile stretch wide. The plan was working. The first cracks had appeared, and soon their whole world would crumble. Digging through papers had become second nature to me. Late at night, after long shifts at the hospital, I'd sit at my kitchen table with stacks of documents spread out like a battlefield. Every transaction, every receipt, every deed told a story, and I was determined to read all of it. That's when I noticed something off. A few of the withdrawal slips carried signatures that didn't look quite right, shaky lines, mismatched dates. The more I compared, the clearer it became. My father had falsified paperwork to push through part of the transfer. He hadn't just stolen, he had lied on official records. That was the thread I needed to pull. I made another anonymous call, this time to the investigators already circling my parents. My voice was calm, steady, almost cheerful as I explained the discrepancies I had found. I emailed copies of the documents, highlighting the forged signatures. I didn't need to give them my name. The evidence spoke louder than anything I could say. Weeks later, the results showed. Their accounts began to freeze one by one. The bank put holds on large sums, pending investigation. I saw it play out in real time. My mother at dinner, handing over a sleek black card, only for the waiter to return embarrassed, saying it had been declined. Her face turned crimson as she hissed at my father. "What's going on, David?" He snapped back, his voice low and dangerous, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. Soon after, I drove by their house and saw the first luxury car being hauled away on the back of a tow truck. My mother stood on the porch, arms crossed, yelling at the man hooking the car up. My father stood behind her, silent, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. I sat in my own car across the street, watching, feeling the satisfaction bloom inside me. Piece by piece, their empire was collapsing. It didn't take long before the pressure started turning them against each other. At our next family dinner, the tension was thick enough to choke on. My mother stabbed at her food before slamming the fork down and turning her glare on me. "This all started when you came sniffing around again," she spat. "Don't think I don't see it, Nicole. You've always been ungrateful. I bet you're behind this." I widened my eyes, feigning shock, even letting my lip tremble a little. "Me? Mom, why would I do something like that? I just want us to heal." The act was so convincing that for a moment, even I almost believed it. My father muttered under his breath, avoiding my gaze, while my mother continued to fume. I excused myself early, hugging them tightly before leaving, pretending to be wounded by her accusation. But when I got into my car, my mask slipped and I smiled. Watching them panic, watching them lose everything piece by piece. It was only the beginning, and I wasn't stopping until they were completely ruined. David was sitting at the kitchen table when the knock came. It wasn't friendly, not the kind of tap that announced a neighbor dropping by. It was sharp, deliberate. When he opened the door, two men in suits handed him a thick envelope. Linda appeared at his shoulder, her bathrobe hanging loose, her hair still curled from sleep. The words, "You've been served," landed heavier than the papers themselves. Inside the envelope were charges: theft, fraud, misappropriation of funds. Their names, David and Linda Matthews, were printed in bold letters. Linda gasped, clutching the papers to her chest as though hiding them would make them vanish. David's face drained of color, his jaw tightening. Within hours, gossip raced through the neighborhood. People whispered at the mailboxes, side-eyed at the grocery store, even crossed the street to avoid them. Linda, once proud of her designer handbags and manicured nails, now couldn't bear to step outside. At David's office, things unraveled even faster. The company where he worked in finance announced his suspension, pending investigation. His colleagues, who used to shake his hand at the door, now avoided him. The office grapevine buzzed with speculation, and within a day, everyone knew the truth. The man who managed millions had been caught stealing from his own family. Nicole sat in the back of the courtroom on the first day of hearings, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When her name was called to testify, she stood with steady composure. Dressed in a simple navy dress, she walked to the stand, her heels clicking against the cold tile floor. Her voice was soft at first, then steadied as she told the story. How she had worked for years to build the account. How every dollar was meant for her grandfather, Henry, a man who had raised her with gentle wisdom and endless patience. She described the nights she sat in the ICU, holding his frail hand as machines beeped steadily beside him. "I wanted him to have comfort in his final days," she said, her voice breaking. "But instead, my parents saw an opportunity to enrich themselves." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Linda dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though no tears came. David avoided Nicole's gaze, staring at the floor, his lips pressed into a thin line. The judge's expression remained stern as Nicole continued. She painted the picture of betrayal, of discovering that the people who should have protected her had instead gutted her trust. "I watched him die," she whispered, "knowing I couldn't give him the care he deserved, because they had taken it all." The prosecutor submitted bank records, evidence of falsified transfers, luxury purchases that had been made in the months Henry lay in the hospital. By the end of the day, the court ordered the freezing of the Matthews' assets, including their home. The very walls that once sheltered their lies now stood as collateral for their crimes. Nicole left the courtroom with her lawyer at her side. She didn't smile, not yet. Justice was still in motion, but the hammer had finally fallen. David and Linda's fall from grace was not sudden, but it was merciless. What had once been a grand home with marble floors and polished chandeliers soon stood empty, its echoes filled with the cold sound of foreclosure notices slapped against the door. The house, their proudest possession, was taken by the bank. The luxury cars that used to sit in the driveway were towed away one by one, the neighbors watching through parted curtains, as if it were a public spectacle. Their credit cards, once swiped effortlessly, were now useless pieces of plastic. Every bill they had ignored came roaring back, and with the weight of legal fees, bankruptcy hung over them like a guillotine. The very friends who once toasted glasses of wine at their table now refused to pick up their calls. Invitations stopped. Social media posts turned cold, some even mocking. David and Linda, once admired, had become a warning, living proof of what greed could do. They had stolen, and now they were alone. Nicole knew their numbers by heart, but she never answered when her phone lit up with their name. The voicemails grew desperate, voices cracking with shame and fear. "Nicole, please, we just need to explain." "Sweetheart, you don't understand. We were trying to protect the family." She deleted them without a second thought. Protect the family? They had stolen nearly $1 million meant to save Henry's life. To Nicole, there was nothing left to explain. In court, the truth was laid bare with precision. Nicole sat tall, her lawyer by her side, as the evidence stacked against her parents was read aloud. Bank transfers, falsified paperwork, testimony, it was undeniable. The betrayal of blood cut the deepest, and the judge's expression never softened. When the ruling came, it was swift. Restitution order in Nicole's favor, assets seized, and a prison sentence for fraud. The gavel fell like thunder, final and merciless. David's shoulders sagged as though he had aged 20 years in an instant. Linda sobbed openly, her cries echoing in the silent courtroom. They turned toward Nicole, begging, pleading with their eyes for a shred of forgiveness, for some sign that their daughter still felt anything. But Nicole's face was carved from stone. There was no pity left in her, no warmth, no trace of the daughter who once looked at her parents with love, that had died in the ICU with Henry, the moment she realized they had stolen the only chance he had at survival. As the bailiffs led them away, Nicole felt no ache in her chest, no tears pressing against her eyes, only cold satisfaction. Her parents had chosen greed over family, and now they were paying the price in full. And Nicole, finally, was free of them. Nicole stood in the quiet courtroom as the judge delivered the final ruling. Her heart pounded, but this time not with fear, only with the certainty that justice had finally reached its destination. David and Linda were sentenced for fraud, their assets seized, their reputations forever stained. The gavel came down like thunder, but instead of shaking her, it steadied her. The battle that had consumed her months, her sleep, and her soul was finally over. She didn't walk away with the full $990,000. The judge was clear. A portion had already been wasted by her parents on frivolous luxuries that could never be reclaimed. Still, Nicole wasn't bitter. The partial funds she did receive felt like a victory, not just for her, but for Henry. She could have used the money to rebuild her own life, but that wasn't what her heart told her to do. She met with her lawyer and financial advisor and made a decision that surprised even them. Nicole established the Henry Lawson Memorial Scholarship Fund, dedicated to supporting medical students who aspired to specialize in geriatric care. "If we couldn't save him," she told the small board gathered, "maybe this can help others like him. Maybe Henry's fight wasn't in vain." The announcement spread through the community. Newspapers wrote about it, neighbors whispered in admiration, and suddenly, Nicole wasn't just the woman whose parents betrayed her. She became the woman who turned pain into purpose. Meanwhile, David and Linda's names appeared in the same papers, but for all the wrong reasons. Fraud, greed, ruin. Weeks later, Nicole visited Henry's grave. The grass had grown fresh and green, the air calm, carrying a light breeze that brushed her face like a blessing. She knelt down, setting fresh flowers against the headstone, her voice soft as though speaking directly to him. "Henry," she whispered, her hand resting on the cool stone. "It's done. Justice was served. They lost everything they thought they'd gained, and I made sure your name is remembered for something greater than their betrayal. You'll live on, not through their lies, but through every student who carries your memory into their work. You deserved better. I hope this is enough. Tears pricked her eyes, but they weren't the kind that dragged her down anymore. They were lighter, cleaner, like a release. She stood, brushing the dirt from her knees, and for the first time in months, she felt truly free. Nicole never forgave her parents. She didn't need to. Forgiveness wasn't owed to people who stole from their own daughter while their father fought for his life. What mattered was that she had faced them, exposed them, and won. They destroyed themselves with greed. She only made sure the world saw it. As she walked away from the graveyard, the setting sun painted the sky with gold. Nicole breathed deeply, steady and sure. This wasn't just an ending. It was the start of a life no longer defined by betrayal, but by resilience, justice, and the quiet power of remembrance. Do you think Nicole was right to cut all ties with her parents after what they did? Or should she have given them another chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this keep you hooked, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss the next one.